Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a content warning for this episode. I am going to put some content warnings throughout the episode, but this one's a particularly tough one in terms of those because this episode extensively discusses and includes some details of mass shootings, specifically school shootings. It also contains mentions of sexual assault, the abuse of children, mental illness, suicide and suicidal ideation, and animal cruelty. I'm going to include timestamps to skip ahead and links to resources in the show notes. I just wanted to make you aware of that in advance. I will also have content warnings throughout the course of the episode. With that out of the way, back to the show.
Did Dave Grossman give me a nosebleed?
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
Hey, I'm Andy Hunter, a longtime fan of all things Nintendo and recent master of the art of plastic bags. Let's leave it at that.
And I'm Kate, and I'm just so happy that we're talking about Dave Grossman again.
You sum up so much of my thoughts here. Thank you for joining me again. We're so happy to see that you've survived Carcer City, Andy, and have come back to us just in time for us to talk more Dave Grossman.
I think it's good that you use the term survive, Kevin, because talking about Dave Grossman, we can't call it living.
We survive, but we will not thrive.
So yeah, I think you've gotten the idea, folks, that we are going to be going back to our long series on Dave Grossman, the self-stylized killologist. We established a lot of foundation over the last 3 months we covered on him. And now we're actually going to dive into Dave Grossman's direct involvement in video games and the violent video game conversation. So just to recap everyone, as we covered in our previous episodes, Dave Grossman fancies himself a killologist, a field that he made up that he claims is the psychology of why people kill. In 1995, while serving as the head of the ROTC program at Arkansas State University, where he also moonlighted as an adjunct psychology professor, Grossman mapped out his killological philosophy in his first book, On Killing, the Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society. And as we've covered in great detail in our previous episodes, the book is an ill-conceived, poorly researched pop psychology book masquerading as a piece of serious academic scholarship that garnered a tepid reception from academics, a mixed reception from the popular press, and a warm embrace from the Second Amendment crowd. It also attracted a Pulitzer Prize nomination, largely because literally any book can claim to have one if you fill out a form and pay an entry fee, to say nothing of the other ways Grossman appears to have padded his resume. Let's not forget, for example, he's also a black belt at being a super cool gun guy, which he earned from his buddy and possible business partner, Sensei Jeff, and is a member of the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame, created by a guy who appears to be pretending to have 3 doctorates. And again, for more on that, check out our previous episodes.
I forgot about Sensei Jeff. Sounds made up.
If people take nothing from these, take the knowledge of Hojutsu from Sensei Jeff.
Kind of surprised that Grossman does not also claim to be a master of gun kata or gun fu or whatever it is they were doing in Equilibrium.
Yeah,
that would seem like the perfect synthesis of his interests.
Maybe he just hasn't seen it yet. We should send him a copy.
I mean, Hojutsu is basically, I think, if someone really made up a martial art based on gun kata, I think Hojutsu is the closest we get. And literally the stuff I've read about Hojutsu is it's a bunch of guys, they train in gis in a dojo for a little bit on their way to going to the gun range. That's pretty much, it's like a pretense to have a little bit of martial arts and play a little bit of dress up, because who doesn't like to do that?
It just strikes me as everything he does it once, and then he doesn't just do pretty okay or get interested and try. It's just he's already awesome at when I was a kid, I knew this kid who sounds a lot like that. It was everything they do awesome, and they're clearly lying. I remember at one point he told me that he picked up a copy of War and Peace at the bookstore an hour before closing, and he read about half of it before they closed. And I'm thinking no, but that just strikes me as Dave Grossman would do something like that. I watched Equilibrium and now I'm an expert in gun kata, and which ties in nicely to my Hojutsu, or what's it called? Hojutsu. Okay.
Yeah, he sounds like one of those guys. It seems like he's one of those people where he's gonna lie, and not only is he gonna lie, he's gonna lie big.
And he's just a blowhard. All about his bullshit. It's your problem.
I ain't calling names, but yeah, he sounds like that, doesn't he? We've all known someone like Dave Grossman. I remember a guy I used to work with who nobody liked this guy. Preface this by because all he did was he claimed he knew everything. Anything get told him was, oh yeah, I know that. And he said stuff like he claimed his dad was in the CIA and all this stuff like fifth grader shit. And so nobody liked him because all he did was just make shit up. And like, on top of that, he was also really unreliable and like, he was not good to work with. Nobody wanted to work with him, but he also had a very strong opinion of himself. And again, I think we've all had a Dave Grossman in our lives, but I'd like to think that most of them did not advocate for, killing people, but In any case, following on Killing's release in late 1995, Dave hit the road, promoting his book and doing readings and book signings. For example, Grossman appeared on the November 13th, 1995 edition of WNYC-AM's New York and Company as part of a series of recently published authors of, to put it mildly, diverse subject matter. Appearing on the same show as our self-stylized killologist, attempting to explain why soldiers commit war crimes, were Mary Ewing Mulligan and Ed McCarthy, co-authors of what I can imagine is a much more interesting book, Wine for Dummies.
Wait, I can only assume they're on this panel because their assertion is like, well, we think dummies get drunk on wine and then use guns to kill people. That's our hypothesis.
They have to resist their natural inclination to not kill people and not to drink some good Pinot.
I like to imagine them coming out there with their own carafe and they're like serving themselves during the panel.
I'll share it to you later on. I have a link in Amazon to Wine for Dummies. It has numerous editions, by the way.
It's in the For Dummies series, right?
It is.
Yeah, they revise those all the time.
Yeah, so he also did a book signing at the House of Books in Merritt Island, Florida on December 22nd, 1995, per a listing on that day in the Orlando Sentinel. In February 1998, after 23 years of service, Grossman officially retired from the United States Army, leaving with the rank of lieutenant colonel. He also left his position running the ROTC program at Arkansas State University to devote his full attention to his new think tank, the Killology Research Group, whose goal, according to an early capture of his website, Saved by the Wayback Machine, was, quote, examining how culture and society change when one human being kills another, and improving the lives of individuals and families in our society through education about the causes and impacts of violent behavior, end quote. Because we all know he's super qualified to do that. And in practice, this primarily meant hosting speaking engagements with people in the law enforcement community, which is a topic we will cover in greater detail in a future episode. And 1998 proved to be an extremely important year for the former soldier and pretend researcher turned killologist, for it was the year when Grossman finally got his big break as a self-stylized expert, and it was all thanks to a pair of troubled suburban white boys in his hometown. And let me warn our listeners in advance that in talking about Grossman's personal war against video games, we're going to have to talk about some school shootings. And I'll spare you the gruesome details of the acts themselves. However, I will note that to understand Grossman's take on what causes school shootings, I will have to talk briefly about some of the perpetrators and provide some information about their backgrounds. And in doing so, we're going to be briefly addressing bullying, self-harm, mental health, physical and sexual abuse, and suicide. I'll include time codes in the show notes if you want to skip ahead. However, if none of this is your bag, we've got some fun, less mass shooting-oriented stories in the back catalog, including that time Acclaim allegedly tried to convince expecting parents to name their children Turok, Pokémon fan projects, and Nintendo's less than chill response to them, and a time when a bunch of people got scammed trying to fund a fighting game involving shittily designed ape drawings. So you can check out all of that and more in our back catalog. And also to help us out here, we turn again to Mr. Andy Hunter, who has a little game that we've set up for these tough times. So in the spirit of that, Andy, I just have to say, get over here.
All right. Whether you're a fan of Pokemon or a fan of prescription drugs, this game is for you. If you're a fan of both, then this game will be too easy. So tell me, is this a Pokemon or a prescription medication? Vinblastine.
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 I'm going to say that that's a prescription drug because Blastine makes me think of Blastoise, and I think that might be why you picked it.
That name sounds complicated enough that it could be either a prescription drug or a Pokemon, but the Vin and the Blast makes me think this is a Pokemon, so I'm going to go Pokemon.
All right. Vinblastine is a chemotherapy medication sold under the brand name Velban, typically used with other medications to treat a number of types of cancer. So, Kate, we're not keeping score, but plus one.
Put it in cash.
We'll leave it to the fans to later say to me who end up winning these. scandalsgamespodcast@gmail.com.
We have not been keeping score, have we?
We have not.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Andy. I feel like we're going to tap it out a couple times in this part of the series. So with that out of the way, here we go. On March the 24th, 1998, 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson and 11-year-old Drew Golden, who were students at Westside Middle School in Jonesboro, Arkansas, drove into their school in a stolen minivan, which they had loaded with snacks, camping supplies, and a whole bunch of stolen guns. When they got to school around lunchtime, they pulled the fire alarm and set up an armed position in a wooded area nearby the school, where they proceeded to fire on students and teachers as they evacuated, killing 4 students and 1 teacher. Their names were Stephanie Johnson, Natalie Brooks, Paige Ann Herring, Brittany Varner, and Shannon Wright, and wounding 10 others in what was then the deadliest non-college school shooting in American history, a record that would stand for a little more than a year. And don't worry, we're going to talk about the one that broke that record in a little bit. The pair tried to flee the scene in the stolen van, only to be arrested, tried, and convicted on 5 counts of murder. However, because they were minors, the prosecutors did not pursue the death penalty and each remained in prison until their 21st birthdays. The shooting literally hit Grossman where he lived. Not only was he a resident of Jonesboro, one of his sons attended one of the local middle schools, although crucially not Westside, although hold on to that, because that point is going to be relevant in a minute. Even so, the shock and horror of the shooting, combined with the understandable fear that his son might have been hurt, clearly affected him. As he explained in an article he wrote for the August the 10th, 1998 edition of Christianity Today, in preface, he delivers his account of his son's possible brush with death with all of the unearned bravado characteristic of all of his alleged accomplishments. And again, for more on that, check out our previous episodes. Here we go, from Grossman, quote, "Here I am, a world traveler and an expert in the field of killology." And again, killology is a made-up field that Dave Grossman made up. And the largest school massacre in American history happens in my hometown of Jonesboro, Arkansas. That was the March 24th schoolyard shooting deaths of 4 girls and a teacher. 10 others were injured, and 2 boys, ages 11 and 13, are in jail, charged with murder. My son goes to one of the middle schools in town, so my aunt in Florida called us that day and asked, "Was that Joe's school?" And we said, "We haven't heard about it." My aunt in Florida knew about the shootings before we did. We turned on the television and discovered the shootings took place down the road from us, but thank goodness not at Joe's school. I'm sure almost all parents in Jonesboro that night hugged their children and said, "Thank God it wasn't you," as they tucked them into bed. But there was also a lot of guilt because some parents in Jonesboro couldn't say that, end quote. And thus shaken, Grossman saw this senseless tragedy as a way to personally enrich himself and sell his book. Wait, did I say that? I meant help. How we doing so far? Just make sure everybody's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I do assume as much as he then immediately does, it seems like, use this as an opportunity to promote his own brand. I assume on some level he was legitimately shaken because that, as a parent, when I hear about a school shooting anywhere in the world, not even just in my town, I'm like, oh, I feel like my heart skips a beat. So I assume he has enough humanity that he felt that, but I'm ready to immediately stop giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of help the so-called killology expert offered the students, teachers, and parents of Westside Middle School in their hour of need varies depending on when and to whom Grossman tells about it. For example, in that Christianity Today article I cited a moment ago, Grossman explained he oversaw the training for the counselors at Westside so they could better help tend to the collective trauma of the Westside community, writing, quote, "I was the lead trainer for the counselors and clergy the night after the shootings, and the following day we debriefed the teachers in groups. Then the counselors and clergy, working with the teachers, debriefed the students, allowing them to work through everything that had happened. Only people who share a trauma can give each other the understanding, acceptance, and forgiveness needed to understand what happened, and then they can begin the long process of trying to understand why it happened," end quote. However, when he testified before the House Judiciary Committee on Juvenile Violence on May the 13th, 1999, a little more than a year after this, he downplayed his role in the shooting, explaining, quote, "In Jonesboro, my hometown, I was at best a trainer of mental health professionals and clergy, and most assuredly not the lead counsel," end quote. Well, which is it, Dave? During an interview for an article that appeared in the October the 1st, 1998 issue of Rolling Stone, he claimed he went to help the people of Jonesboro at the behest of no less than the federal government, which also sounds suspicious to me, since I'm pretty sure there were plenty of people much more qualified to help manage the kind of community trauma going on at Westside Middle School than the dude who ran the local college's ROTC, who also just happened to adjunct a couple of psych classes on the side, all of which sounds like the equivalent of saying the fucking gym teacher to do that. This is
But what if the gym teacher was a former West Point professor, Kevin?
Given my experience with gym teachers, I would not be shocked if most gym teachers are ex-military already. Whether or not it makes them qualified in this specific situation is another thing, though. And this is all on top of the fact, and I cannot stress this enough, that Dave Grossman, as far as I can tell, was not and still is not a certified counselor of any kind, let alone an expert in managing trauma. And his only practical counseling experience was a grad school internship at an Austin, Texas middle school that maybe lasted a year. He's a master's in education in counseling psychology. He does not, crucially, have a degree in psychology. And so, nothing in his background tells me that he is qualified to do what he's saying he's doing.
I do actually, I'm just thinking about this. This is very much a personal anecdote and brings it way back down from the level of tragedy we're talking about to something far smaller but still bad. I remember distinctly when I was a kid, I was out with my mother and there was this, we didn't see anything happen or anything gory, but there was a really big car accident that had happened at an intersection. There were 3 cars and the whole intersection was closed. There were police, ambulances, etc. And traffic was just coming to a stop because this had just kind of all unfolded. And we're just, sitting there in the car like you're supposed to do. And this car goes into the intersection and kind of turns off at a rakish angle, so really blocking everything, everybody going every way, and it's just some random minivan. And some woman gets out, and as far as I know, she didn't know anybody, and she wasn't she was just a person who thought she could do something, I suppose. And what ended up happening was she jumped out of the car and she was just running around talking to all the various police officers and EMTs and everybody who she could, get. And they were all just kind of looking at her confused, who are you and why are you? I mean, didn't hear what they were saying, obviously, but just the body language and stuff. It's no, you can't help us. I did see the police officer very clearly point to her car at one point. It's well, can you at least move your car because you're blocking the emergency vehicles from getting over here? This is to say that she's kind of reminding me of Dave, I'm just going to insert myself into this situation, even though I have no qualifications. And in so doing, I'm actually going to make things significantly worse.
Obviously, you all don't have experience in making a scene.
It was just a weird, I've never forgotten it, because my mom, we were who is this person? Does she know someone here? Is she gonna take off her windbreaker and she's got a white coat underneath? She's a doctor or something? And I mean, I actually, and by comparison to that, years later, I did see a minor car accident unfold where someone got hurt and a person pulled over and pulled a medical bag out of the backseat of his car, clearly was a doctor, and went to help. And it's if you're going to help, it's a little more visible than you just kind of running around, again, making a scene, making yourself I want to be a hero, just so you know, I want to be a hero. I would like to be a hero today. How can I do that? And it's just you're making it so much worse.
And then, of course, she later appeared on the local news as a medical expert.
Yeah.
I was at the scene.
Thank God this was before Facebook, because she probably would have gone on Facebook Live or something nonsense.
TikTok, she'd be TikToking that. It's always the close up. You've got the green screen background. I was there and I had to help out and all this stuff. And
I struggle to know whether I should post about this, but I want everyone to know what happened today.
Whatever help Grossman actually gave the people of Jonesboro, we may never know for sure. As far as I can tell, the only source we have on his alleged involvement comes from the one person who would benefit the most from telling people he offered his services to the victims of the Westside shooting, that is Dave Grossman himself. In any case, one clear benefit of being a so-called expert who happened to live in Jonesboro in the aftermath of the shooting is it gave Grossman a whole bunch of press exposure. The shooting transformed Jonesboro into a veritable media circus, and local, regional, national, and international press descended on Craighead County for their headlines and hot takes on the story. Because this, again, was a simpler time in America when violent mass death events involving children weren't just what happened on an average Tuesday in the greatest country in the world, TM. And Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman dove into the media firestorm with all the vigor of a man with a story to tell and, more importantly, a book to sell, courageously throwing himself in front of any journalist who would listen to him to proclaim how violent media, especially violent video games, were conditioning an entire generation of young people to become senseless killers who would murder an entire classroom at the slightest provocation. Something you can learn all about in my book, available through Little Brown and Company or your local B. Dalton or Weldon books. For example, As he told a reporter from the Times of London, quote, "In video arcades, they learn to shoot and kill, shoot and kill. They watch as the bodies twist and the brains fly, and we have the audacity to ask how they have learned to kill and like it when we taught them how to do it in the first place," end quote. Or as he explained to a reporter for the New York Daily News, quote, "Where do you get the shooting skills from? From interactive video games. When you pick your gun up and start shooting, you don't stop. A whole slice of kids have shot hundreds of thousands of rounds of artificial ammunition a quarter at a time. They are developing muscle memory about aiming and firing," end quote. And how many of those kids go up to shoot up a school, Dave?
It actually, so I know we've talked on the show in the past about, studies disproving the notion that video games increase tendencies of violence. But I wonder if anybody has ever actually done a study about, do people who play a lot of video games, that involve gun shooting, how does it affect their actual marksmanship? If they otherwise haven't ever, take somebody who plays video games and has never handled a real gun and somebody who doesn't play video games and has never handled a real gun, how do they compare in terms of their marksmanship? Because in addition to the proclivity toward violence, all of these talking heads also claim that video games, like Dave Grossman is doing right now, increase their ability to accurately aim. And I'm just wondering if anybody has ever tested how accurate that half of the statement is.
I mean, I can tell you as a person who has both played shooting games and shot a gun on a firing range, the two skills don't mix. If you're good at one, it does not necessarily mean you're good at the other. This doesn't shock you, I'm sure. They're two completely different things, and they have two completely different makeups of what makes you good at one versus the other. It's more like, are you good at shooting if you play a video game? I personally don't think so. From experience, it simply doesn't translate. It's part of the argument also that if you play a lot of shooting games, you're going to be more comfortable with a real gun shooting people.
That is part of his assertion, yes.
Yeah. Because, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but the act of killing, the ability to take a human life is very hard to be able to do. And this was something that I saw in an essay about that Ben Shapiro Run, Hide, Fight movie, where the hero of that movie, the teenage girl, is defending people from the mass shooting, the school shooting, is like this badass action hero who, coldly kills people while, putting out one-liners. And it's like, that is not something that we should aspire to. Generally speaking, human beings cannot take another human life regardless of the circumstances. And that's one of the reasons why it's so tough for people who are in the military, because they have to sometimes, or have to be ready to. And that's a very hard thing to get over psychologically. No matter how many hours of Doom you play, it's a really, yeah.
I think both of these are great points. I'll start with yours, Kate, first. Yeah, I think that's a great observation. Like, I don't have a lot of in-person shooting experience. I've played games pretty much my whole life, and I've been exposed to shooting games a lot. I've done a little bit of reenactment weapons and firing, and yeah, it's a different experience. That's to say nothing about target shooting or anything, which I have very, very little to do.
I've done target shooting. I've done it with a rifle and with a revolver, and in both cases, it's just a different sport. It's like saying, you're really good at Madden, you must be awesome at playing football on the field. It's like, no.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. But the other part of it, Andy, your question, I'm glad you brought that up. We are going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a future episode, but I will tell you that there was at least one study that came out in the journal Communication Research. It was first published on April the 30th, 2012, which examined that very question. Does playing video games make you a more accurate marksman? And I'll give you the short version now, that basically they took a bunch of subjects and they had them play one of three different video games. All of them were Wii games because, Wii motion controls. So the three games were Super Mario Galaxy was kind of their control group. It was like a non-violent, non-shooting game. Then they did the target shooting minigame in Wii Play. And then they did the Wii version of Resident Evil 4. Because, Resident Evil 4, the Wii version allows you to hold the Wiimote like a gun and shoot at people. And the people who were in the shooting games were either randomly selected as either using the classic controller, like a traditional controller kind of style, or the shooting thing. And then they put them on an airsoft rifle range. And they gave them an airsoft pistol, and they had them fire at a human target, human-shaped target, not a person. And they measured not just their accuracy, but where they shot. And the study claimed that not only were the people who played the, violent video game Resident Evil 4 and used the gun style of shooting on it, not only were they more accurate, they aimed for the head more. Now, this study has a lot of problems with it, which we're not going to get into. And I will tell you that in 2016, Communication Research retracted the article because of a lot of bad research. So people have tried How effectively they've tried to argue this is a whole nother thing. And I will tell you, Dave does cite this article because that's the kind of person he is. But yeah, so to answer your question, people have looked into this. The studies also don't prove that, or at least it's hard to say because there's reason to believe, and again, this is skipping ahead to a few others, there's reason to believe that people who put out the study falsified their data.
Kevin, I don't want to derail, and we can totally cut this from the episode, but I'm okay. But
Did you fall?
no, I didn't fall. No, I just got a little nosebleed.
Oh,
like, did Dave Grossman give me a nosebleed?
oh God. Are you all right?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I just, if you want to know, my camera's off right now, and I wasn't going to say anything. Wait, Dave Grossman just spontaneously gave me a nosebleed.
Oh, if you need me to go down there and help,
I will. I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. In any case, Grossman's assertions of the dangerous effects of shooting games were, to put it mildly, fucking catnip to the press. He was everything they could hope for. In a time of chaos and uncertainty, where people were desperately fumbling for some kind of meaning amidst all this carnage and death, here was a local expert who could provide a simple and easy cause for Jonesboro and other school shootings like West Paducah, Kentucky, and Pearl, Mississippi, and anywhere else violent young men decided to ready their high-powered rifles. And on top of that, did you know that he's a West Point psychology professor who literally wrote the book on killing, which I heard was even nominated for a Pulitzer Prize? With that kind of resume, which you should definitely not look too far into, there's no way a guy like that would lead us astray.
And he knows a lot about wine, right?
He learned it from those Wine for Dummies people, which I'm sure is a lot more valuable book than his book.
I'm still wondering why they were there.
They had a new book out, I guess, you know? Why they picked them on the same day? That's mystifying.
Imagine, like, you're both there, your tables are next to each other, and you have to, like, try to make small talk with this guy. Oh, what's your book about?
Yeah. One's about why people committed the My massacre, and this other one is which wine pairs well with fish. As a result, numerous reporters ran pull quotes from Dave Grossman, giving both him and his ideas tons of free exposure as they uncritically repeated Grossman's outlandish, and as we've covered already, literally unbelievable claims of only 15% of World War II soldiers firing their guns and the insidious effects of operant conditioning on both our soldiers and America's children. It then didn't take long for other pundits and self-proclaimed experts to start repeating Grossman's talking points, lending him further credence as an expert on killing, violent media, and especially violent video games. So it has this kind of cascading effect where we have this one person presenting a bad faith argument that the news media picks up uncritically, presenting it as true information or reliable information, which then other people are reading and accepting as fact, and then disseminating it further into this. So this one person then becomes this nexus point for this misinformation to spread. Something as I think the last couple of years has proven is really easy and very fucking dangerous to do. Now, with all of Grossman's crowing about firing rates, which, as we previously covered, had been soundly debunked by experts with more academic rigor and personal integrity than the self-proclaimed killologist, it's also worth mentioning that there were potentially other factors that needed to be taken into account, regardless of how much Crusader no remorse Drew Golden and Mitchell Johnson may or may not have played. So I'm going to try to offer some brief context on the shooters. But before we do that, get over here.
All right. Man, a little Dave Grossman goes a long way. Pokémon or prescription medication, Tricor.
Tricor. That already reminds me of a character from Mortal Kombat called Triborg.
Are we expanding this to be medication, Pokemon, or Mortal Kombat character?
Ask your doctor if Motaro is right for you.
I'm going to guess Pokemon this time. I've never heard of it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's a lot of Pokemon out there.
I'm going to go the opposite. I'm going to say this is a prescription drug.
All right. Is it a 3-armed Pokemon, or is it a brand name for the medication fenofibrate, an oral medication of the fibrate class used to treat abnormal blood lipid levels? So, like certain cholesterols and fats in the blood. So, alas, not a Pokemon is Tricor. Although I could certainly imagine a regional variant of Dodrio or something called Tricor.
You hadn't gone with a 3-armed thing. I'm like, well, wait a minute.
That name reminds me, and the comparison to Tricor is like those memes you see of the people who say what Dugtrio looks like underneath the ground. And it's always like 3 buff dudes.
Freaking terrifying.
So I'm curious though, Triborg, is that just like a 3-armed cyborg, or what is their deal?
So Triborg was created for Mortal Kombat XL when they did the bundled version of Mortal Kombat X. And Triborg is a combination of Sector, Cyrax, Smoke, and Cyber Sub-Zero. And because in those games, you could change your fighting style. And if you change your fighting style for Triborg, it's just the moveset of Cyrax, Sector, and Cyber Sub-Zero.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty fun. It's a fun character. Anyway, these are medicine for the soul, Andy. Not only are you listing medicines that are helping people with cancer and blood pressure and all that, it is helping soothe my soul here. So, okay, so like I said, let's dive into this and try to offer some context into Mitchell Johnson and Drew Golden and try to see if maybe there were other mitigating factors than playing too many video games. And I'm just going to say up front that I am not here to definitively say what caused the Westside School shooting or any of the shootings we're going to talk about. People are complicated. They're messy organisms. They're shaped by myriad internal and external factors, from upbringing to brain chemistry to socioeconomic status to how often they go on Reddit. And you should always be leery when someone declares that they found the one cause behind why people commit violent acts, because as we can definitely see with Dave Grossman, chances are good that person's trying to sell you something.
Yeah, if I can jump in there, I think that that's kind of at the core of this. So, thought when something as, unfathomably upsetting as these shootings happens, and you want an explanation, you want to find out why it happened to help you make sense of this, and also not just to make sense of it, but what can we do to prevent this in the future? If we figured out that anybody who eats oranges ends up doing ends up in this, if that's like the core factor, then we can do that. That's something we can prevent, right? Anybody who plays violent video games, then we can get rid of video games, and then this won't happen anymore. And as you're saying, like, it's just not true. There are a huge variety of factors that contribute to these things. And if you look at such as it is profile of any one of these shooters after the fact, there's no answer. And I think that that's where there's this sort of insistence of, no, I know the answer. And it's kind of similar to when someone loses a loved one and someone's like, wait, I can help you talk to them on the other side. It's in this case, what Dave is doing, it's grifting. It's like, I know the answer. I know how to deal with mass shootings. I know how to prevent mass shootings in the future. And as you said, well, you didn't say this directly, but it sounds like it's snake oil.
Yeah, and you see this a lot with coverage of mass shootings among politicians, among the press, and among folks like Dave. Dave is a symptom of a larger illness when it comes to this kind of approach, is that we see these different events and people try to link them together as a pattern, a continuity between various mass shootings. Westside Middle School, Columbine, Parkland, Newtown, that if we can just isolate, there must be one thread that links all of them together. And if we can find that one thread, then we can stop these things. Nobody wants these things to happen. I think even Dave would agree that nobody wants these things to happen.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if I can jump to the end, there is one thing that links every mass shooter. It's they have a gun. And then we live in a society where guns are easy to access, whether they've bought them on their own or they lived in a house where parents or somebody had guns. But all these people, I agree. I would love to push a button, that said, we stop having video games because video games make people kill people. But people are not willing to push the button that says we stop having guns because guns are used to kill people. And I think there's also there's a lot of money behind obfuscating the connection between access to guns and amount of mass shootings. And I know that we on the podcast have gone into this before, and everybody, although I am Scandalous Games resident lawyer and doctor and financial advisor, I am not speaking for anybody other than myself when I voice these particular opinions.
I think you make a fair observation, because I amend my previous statement that there was one consistent thing in all these school shootings, which is that they had access to guns. They had access to weapons. They had access to, in some cases, substantial arsenals. Wait till we talk about Columbine, which we aren't going to do in detail today. I promise we are going to talk about that eventually. But the stuff they had access to, oh my dear God. The stuff that they had access to in this situation too. These two boys got access to a lot of readily accessible firearms. So yeah, I think that's a consistent thing. But there are people who try to say, well, okay, there has to be one constant thread. There's no way it can be guns. Well, we're going to take guns and put them in a little box, put them on the side over here. It's got to be something else. It can't be the guns. It can't be the guns. It's got to be movies. It's got to be video games. It's got to be upbringing. It's got to be mental health. It's got to be something. But a lot of what I've read about a lot of these school shootings is that it's very hard. Once you eliminate guns, it's very hard to connect patterns because you have different people with different upbringings, different exposures, different mental health levels. And so why don't we dive into that a little bit here with the two shooters in the Westside Middle School shooting? And what we'll do is we'll start with Mitchell Johnson. And again, you're going to see as we talk about this that there's not a lot of consistency aside from their weapons. Before moving to Jonesboro when he was 10, 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson had a chaotic home life. His father was a bad-tempered, abusive alcoholic, and his parents went through a messy divorce, during which his mom took custody and moved him and his brother from Minnesota to Arkansas. Teachers at Westside described him as a polite boy who received good grades, was a three-sport athlete for the baseball, basketball, and football teams, and sang in the school choir. Classmates, meanwhile, described him as a wannabe tough guy who sometimes claimed he was a member of the infamous LA street gang, the Bloods. We've all known a kid like this. I'll never forget, as a substitute teacher, I substitute taught at a decidedly white, middle-class, suburban high school. And I'll never forget sitting during a study hall and this one kid who must have been maybe 14, scrawny white kid, and was talking up these two girls. And he's like, oh, I'm tough. I go into Camden and I buy crack. And like, I wanted to go to this kid. It's like, you are so full of shit. I can't say that to a child, but like, you're so full of shit. We've all known, violence aside, we've all known a kid who had to say how tough he was.
I just knew the one who said he could read really fast. That's all.
But by all accounts, Mitchell was not a bully, nor was he a social outcast, but there were instances where he was both victim and abuser. And this is, again, content warning and a whole section about content warnings. Here's one. When he was young, he was the victim of persistent sexual abuse by an older boy who also abused Mitchell's younger brother. He also got in trouble a year before the shooting for inappropriately touching a 2-year-old girl. Sorry, that's part of this. Reportedly, he went through bouts of self-harm and suicidal ideation, even telling friends at times he was planning to kill himself. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Mitchell's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was kicked off the basketball team for cutting himself, and classmates recalled him making violent threats in the days before the shooting. And then there was Drew Golden, whose background could not have been more different than Mitchell's. Drew came from a stable, middle-class home, the son of 2 postmasters who viewed him as one family friend recalled, quote, the center of their world, end quote. So less chaotic, more like a doted upon, sounds like for all outward appearances, Drew came from a loving, stable home. As with other Jonesboro kids, Drew grew up around guns. For example, his paternal grandfather was an avid hunter and worked for the Arkansas Fish and Game Commission, and Drew, from a young age, both owned and handled his own guns. By the time of the shooting, he was an experienced hunter at the ripe old age of 11. Some people who knew him felt like he may have been a little too into guns. From a 2003 report on school shootings from the National Research Council, quote, he was given a rifle for his 6th birthday and had other weapons of his own as well. Drew was fascinated, possibly obsessed with guns. Some teachers say it was his toy of choice as a young child. And the year of the shooting, he drew a picture of 2 rifles when asked to draw something that symbolized his family for his social studies class. He even did a skit about guns for his English class, end quote. So a bit into guns, this kid. Now, owning, using, or being around guns does not mean that someone is going to turn them on other people. However, there was another key component to consider when examining Drew's actions. Now, Drew was reportedly well-behaved around his parents and teachers. He was not a social outcast. He had friends. He got good grades, and even played trumpet in the school band. However, most everyone else who knew Drew described him as having a violent and sadistic streak. He was a bully. He hit other kids. He threatened to shoot people with his BB gun or cut them with a knife he kept strapped to his leg. On top of that, he also, another content warning here, on top of that, he also had a history of torturing and murdering cats. By most accounts, Drew appears to have been the mastermind in the Westside shooting. He stole his stepfather's van and secured their arsenal of 11 weapons. 11 weapons from guns he stole from both his parents' and grandfather's homes. He pulled the fire alarm that got people outside, and police concluded he did the overwhelming majority of the shooting. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that being a hunter and a shooter from a young age likely helped Drew Golden become a more efficient school shooter than any video game could have. I'm not qualified to diagnose him, and I'm not even going to try, but I will also note he expressed little remorse after he and Mitchell were apprehended. As a reporter for the UK's Mirror commented on the boy's trial for a March the 26, 1998 article, quote, one of the boy killers sat in court yesterday looking relaxed and even smiled at his parents. Drew Golden didn't seem to have a care in the world as he listened to the charges that he committed multiple murder. In contrast, his 13-year-old friend Mitchell Johnson sobbed, end quote. And all of this is to say that I'm not convinced of Dave Grossman's assertion that one too many sessions of the House of the Dead at the local Exhilarama were to blame for the deaths of 4 students and 1 teacher in Jonesboro. Get over here. God damn it.
I'll say this. I stopped myself. But when you said one kid had a history of killing and maiming cats, I wanted to make the joke. You gotta be fucking kidding me.
Oh.
But I held myself, and instead I just mentioned it here. So I'm a hero, is what I'm trying to say. So tell me, Pokemon or prescription drug? Tranquil.
Ooh, that's a simple name. That could be my first guess. That sounds like a brand name for like an antidepressant. So I'm going to go with prescription drug.
I'm going to stick with Pokemon. I'm picturing like a bird.
It is Tranquil, the wild pigeon Pokemon, introduced in the 5th generation of games, I'm pretty sure. It evolves from Pidove at level 21 and evolves into Unpheasant, starting at level 32. Tranquil spelled with 2 L's, like a feather used as a pen.
I just brought up an image of it. So yeah, it looks like like it's got like a pigeon's colors.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And Generation 5 was the one based on the United States with the big city that looks like New York. So yes, it makes sense that then their regional bird would be a pigeon.
T-Dove, the thing that evolves from, is also adorable looking.
But can anything really replace Pidgey in our hearts?
For many people, or at least many people of a certain age, Pidgey was the first Pokemon they probably ever caught.
Yeah, Pidgey, or I guess it could have been a Caterpie.
Caterpie for me, and then Pidgey.
Oh, or Rattata. I think might be on the same route as Pidgey, possibly.
Yeah, I honestly don't remember what my first Pokemon was, because it was either Rattata or Pidgey. But like I played Red a lot, and then I played Blue, and so like I believe I restarted Red at one point, so I can't remember which one I did, but it was one of those two. But yeah.
I just remember with the Pokemon Yellow, I caught a Caterpie. I think it was like in, the front yard in front of my house. The first battle you get into.
All right. Thank you again, please, Eddie. The Westside Middle School shooting. So again, I think all of these factors need to be taken into account. I can't definitively say any one reason why this happened. I'm not trying to, but I think all of these things need to be taken into account as well, regardless of how many video games they happen to play. And Grossman addressed all of these potential complicating factors with the trademark academic rigor he demonstrated on Killing. Namely, he either downplayed or completely ignored them. And it's safe to say that the press did Dave a real solid in this regard, because in their coverage of Jonesboro, I found no meaningful pushback to any of Grossman's assertions that video games were responsible for causing the 2 boys to murder a whole bunch of people. And the Westside Middle School shooting became something of an origin story for Dave. For example, in later retellings, Grossman claimed it's what inspired him to look into violent media in the first place, leading him to the conclusion that video games were actively teaching kids to kill. For example, in an interview for Rolling Stone, published on October the 1st, 1998, so several months after the Jonesboro shooting, writer Randall Sullivan noted, quote, "Only after his book came out, Dave recalls, did he begin to realize that this process I had described is exactly what we're doing to our children through the mediums we use to entertain them," end quote. And that's obviously not true, and could have been easily disproved had Sullivan done even a surface level reading of On Killing, as the entire last third of the book is devoted to his thoughts on violent media. Like, that is a straight up lie. That is not true. Speaking of that, I'd also like to point out that in some later retellings of what happened in Jonesboro, Dave has taken to claiming his son actually was a student at Westside Middle School, contradicting himself from earlier accounts where he said his son wasn't a student because I guess it wasn't a big enough of an origin story for him if he didn't have some actual skin in the game.
I mean, who among us hasn't seen a decent superhero story retconning the beginning once you realize how much steam you're picking up,
Yeah, it makes more narrative sense for him to have someone there.
And who are we to let facts get in the way of, what Dave wants to tell us?
Exactly. From a September the 6th, 2018 report in the Anderson, South Carolina-based Anderson Independent Mail, on a talk that Dave gave to local students and school officials, quote, Grossman talked about his personal experience with deadly school shootings. His son was a student at Westside Middle School near Jonesboro, Arkansas, when an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old fatally shot 4 students and a teacher on March the 24th, 1998. I was paralyzed, he said. I cannot communicate to you the magnitude of the horror when you turn on the national news and they're at your kid's school, end quote. I mean, he literally can't communicate that because by his own admission, his son was not a student at Westside Middle School, and it would appear he's now attempting to manipulate a tragedy where 5 people, including 4 children, died in a ghoulish attempt to enhance his own brand. Fuck this guy. If there's any message you could take from the series, fuck this guy.
Yeah, so it's almost like he's acting as though he's in a crisis, as though he were some sort of crisis actor. But
I don't know if there's like a name for that though, Andy. I don't
know. I'm just surprised he didn't lie and say that he himself went to that school. Like, I was dodging bullets there as I fled from my kindergarten class.
Fellow kids.
I was held back several times, if you're wondering why I was there. True to form, given what we covered in On Killing, Grossman also claimed in the same Rolling Stone interview that the press was actively trying to suppress his revelations about the role of video games in the shooting, which is laughably false, given both we've already covered regarding the Westside Middle School shooting, and the fact that he's telling this to a writer for a nationally circulated publication. But, tune into my half-dozen interviews and public appearances about how no one is listening to me. However, as we've already covered, the only way you could describe Dave Grossman as a liberal is in his relationship with facts.
Oh boy, yes.
Okay, so we just talked about Dave, now saying that his kid was at Westside, clearly contradicting his own statements. It's almost like an Orwellian thing where, like, now the new one is the truth, And facts don't care about your feelings, I guess. But all right, on that cheerful note, I think that this might be a good place to wrap up for today. And so next time we are going to pivot away from the Westside Middle School shooting to talk about how over the next several years, Dave Grossman cemented his place as a so-called expert on the relationship of media violence and video games. And we're going to talk about how he became a media-anointed expert during several other school shootings to happen during the late 1990s. And so that's where we'll pick up next time. And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seek by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NC SA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Andy Hunter.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.